My name is Claire. I am 31 years old, and 6 months ago my mother-in-law stood in my hospital room, looked at my newborn son sleeping in my arms, and said the words I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said, "I always knew you'd find a way to make this look real." My husband was standing 3 feet away. The baby was 4 hours old. I had just spent 19 hours in labor and my son was here, breathing, perfect, 7 pounds and 2 ounces of proof that everything she had spent my entire pregnancy trying to destroy was a lie. And she looked at him like he was a document she was still deciding whether to authenticate. I didn't say anything in that moment. I looked at my son. I looked at my husband. And I felt something settle in me that was quieter and more permanent than anything I could have said out loud. Because I knew something she didn't know yet. I knew what the next 6 months were going to look like. Not because I planned it. Because I had spent 12 months watching a woman architect my destruction with the patience and precision of someone who had done it before. And I had learned, slowly and at great personal cost, exactly how to let the truth do what I was too exhausted to do myself. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where we tell quiet stories about people who were doubted in their most human moments and survived long enough to watch the doubt collapse under its own weight. If you have ever been accused of something so deeply untrue that the accusation itself told you more about the accuser than you ever needed to know, this one is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Let me take you back 14 months, to the evening my mother-in-law looked me in the eye over a dinner table and told my husband's family I was a con artist. Before I tell you what happened in that hospital room and in the 6 months that followed, you need to understand the world I had married into and the woman who had decided, before I finished saying my vows, that I did not belong in it. My husband's name is Daniel. He is the kind of man who apologizes when he bumps into furniture, who remembers the names of every waiter who has ever served us, who called his grandmother every Sunday for 11 years without missing one. He is the second son of a family that built a commercial real estate company over 40 years from a single strip mall in a mid-sized city to a portfolio that, by the time I met Daniel, was valued at just over $10 million. I want to be precise about that number because it is the number that changed how his mother looked at me. Not right away. At first, Margaret was careful, warm enough to pass at a distance, the way expensive imitations are warm enough to pass until someone who knows the real thing looks closely. She asked about my family, my work, my background, with the thoroughness of someone conducting an interview she had already decided the outcome of. I was a high school art teacher. I drove a 7-year-old car. I had a savings account that was respectable by normal standards and invisible by hers. I loved her son. That part was simple and true, and available to anyone who spent 10 minutes watching us together. Margaret spent our entire 18-month courtship looking for the other explanation. Daniel told me not to worry about it. He said his mother was protective, that she had always been careful with the people who came close to her family, that once she saw how serious we were she would come around. He said this with the confidence of a man who had never had reason to doubt his mother's fundamental goodness, which I understood and did not hold against him. I tried. That is the thing I need you to know. I tried with Margaret the way you try with someone whose approval you understand you may never earn but pursue anyway because you love the person whose world they are central to. I brought food to her house. I remembered her preferences. I asked about her life before Daniel, about the years of building the business, about the people she had loved and lost. I was genuinely curious. She was genuinely interesting. And she was also, underneath all of it, completely convinced that I was there for the money. She never said it directly. That was her method. Margaret was a woman who operated in suggestions and implications, in the tone under the sentence, in the question shaped to carry a conclusion. She would ask Daniel in front of me whether he had thought about a prenuptial agreement, in the voice of someone raising a practical concern. She would mention, in family conversations, stories about women who had married into wealth and exited it significantly richer than they arrived. She would look at me at the right moment in those conversations and then look away, which is the move of someone who wants you to receive a message and wants plausible deniability about having sent it. Daniel heard none of it the way I heard it. That is the thing about being inside a dynamic. You see the architecture of it differently depending on where you're standing. We got married anyway. Beautiful day. I wore a dress I had saved for, and Margaret wore a smile I had learned to read by then and stood beside her son in the photographs with the expression of a woman attending an event she was still deciding whether to endorse. I was happy. I want to say that clearly. The marriage was good from the first morning. Daniel was exactly who he had been in the courtship, steady and warm and present in the way that makes daily life feel like something worth showing up for. We bought a house. We talked about children, the wanting kind of talk, the kind where you name them before you've started trying. We started trying. This is the part where Margaret's suspicion found its shape. The first month I was pregnant, I didn't tell anyone except Daniel. We agreed to wait until 12 weeks, the standard caution, the waiting period most couples observe. I was careful and quiet and privately, completely overwhelmed by the specific joy of it, the knowledge that the thing we had been wanting was happening. At 11 weeks I had a miscarriage. I will not spend a long time here because this is not that story, but I will say this. Losing that pregnancy was the loneliest I have ever been in a room full of people who said the right things. Daniel was devastated and present, and exactly the partner he needed to be. The rest of it, the getting through it part, happened in the quiet interior of a grief that doesn't have clean edges and doesn't resolve on a schedule. 3 months later, we were pregnant again. I was cautious this time. Careful. I did not let myself feel the full weight of the wanting until the 12-week scan came back clean, and the doctor used the word healthy with the confidence of someone who deals in facts. Daniel cried in the parking lot of the clinic. I held his hand and felt the joy arrive properly for the first time, the kind you let yourself actually have when the fear has stepped back far enough. We told his family at dinner that weekend. Margaret's reaction was the first thing that told me something had shifted. She was not warm. She was not cold. She was precise in the way of someone filing information away, asking questions about dates and timing with the thoroughness I had come to associate with her performing a calculation. She hugged me. The hug had a quality to it I couldn't name until later, the quality of a gesture being made for an audience. That night, Daniel's phone rang late. He took it in the other room. When he came back, he looked like a man who had been told something he was still processing. Margaret had called to express her concerns. She had told him that she had done some thinking, that the timing felt unusual to her, that the miscarriage had been convenient in the sense that it had established the fact of fertility without producing an heir, that she wanted Daniel to be careful, that she thought he should consider whether this pregnancy was what it appeared to be. I am going to let that land for a moment because I want you to understand the specific architecture of what she was suggesting. She was not questioning whether I was pregnant. She was questioning whether the pregnancy was his. She was suggesting to her son that his wife of 8 months had engineered a pregnancy using someone else's child to secure access to a $10 million inheritance. Daniel told her she was wrong. I know he did because I know him, and because the conversation I heard through the door before he moved further away had the specific tone of a man shutting something down. He came back to bed and held me and said his mother was struggling with some things and that he had handled it and that I did not need to worry. I did not sleep, because I understood something Daniel was not yet willing to understand about his mother. This was not struggling. This was strategy, and strategies do not end because someone pushes back once. They adapt. The next month the suggestion spread, not loudly, not in ways that could be directly confronted. In the way of a woman who had spent 40 years building something and understood the value of laying foundations before you raise walls. A comment to Daniel's aunt that she was hopping for the best but had questions. A conversation with Daniel's brother, the older one, Thomas, who called Daniel to pass along his own version of her concerns with slightly different wording that made it clear they had been rehearsed together. A reference, in a family group chat I was included in, to an article about paternity fraud that was presented without comment. Just a link, just sitting there in the middle of a chain that also contained baby shower planning. The link was there for 40 minutes before Daniel deleted it and called his mother. I sat in my living room with my hand on my stomach and felt the thing that had been building for weeks settle into something I recognized from my professional life. I was a teacher. I dealt with situations that required documentation. I dealt with accusations made without evidence and defenses built from facts. I knew the difference between a conflict you resolve with a conversation and one you survive by keeping records. I started keeping records, not obsessively, not dramatically. Just the quiet, organized habit of a woman who had spent her career teaching teenagers to support their arguments with evidence, and understood that the time to start gathering it is before you need it, not after. I saved the group chat screenshot. I noted the dates of the conversations Daniel relayed. I kept the voicemail Margaret left me directly on a Thursday afternoon, the one where she said, in her careful implication-shaped language, that she hoped I understood the importance of honesty in a family like theirs, that trust was the foundation of everything they had built, and that she would always be there for Daniel no matter what happened. The last sentence delivered with the specific weight of a woman who expected something to happen. I did not confront her. Daniel wanted to handle it, and I let him because it was his family, and he was trying, and I believed, more than I believed almost anything at that point, that the baby I was carrying was going to be the clearest answer to every question she had manufactured. I just made sure I would be ready. If you're watching this and you've ever had to document your own life to defend it from someone who was supposed to be family, you already know the weight of that folder on your phone. Stay with me. The hospital room is coming, and so is everything that happened after it. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest. The pregnancy progressed the way the doctor said it would. I was tired and uncomfortable and occasionally overwhelmed and entirely certain, in the specific cellular way of a woman growing a person, that what was happening inside me was real and mine and ours. I went to every appointment. I sent Daniel videos of the ultrasounds. I set up a nursery in the small room off the hallway that had been a home office, and I painted it a color we had argued about for 3 weeks and both loved by the time it was done. Margaret attended the baby shower. She sat in the chair nearest the door, which I noted, and smiled the smiles of a woman executing a social obligation. And when she hugged me goodbye, her hand rested on my stomach briefly, the way hands do, and I saw something move across her face that I still think about. I think she wanted to be wrong. I think somewhere underneath the suspicion and the strategy and the 40 years of protecting what her family had built, there was a woman who understood that what she was doing to her son's marriage was corrosive and irreversible, and that it was being driven not by evidence but by fear. The fear of someone new getting close to something she had spent her life guarding. I think she wanted to be wrong and chose not to be. The labor was 19 hours, the kind that has its own texture and timeline that exists outside of normal time entirely. Daniel was there for all of it in the way he is there for everything, completely. At 4:17 in the morning, my son arrived, and he was real, and he was here, and he had Daniel's nose and my coloring and a cry that filled the room with the specific, undeniable proof that this was happening. Daniel called his mother. She arrived at 7 in the morning, dressed carefully, carrying a gift bag, performing the arrival of a grandmother meeting her first grandchild. I was in the bed with my son. I was exhausted in the specific way of someone who has just done the hardest physical thing of their life and is also the happiest they have ever been. The two things were true simultaneously, and I was holding both of them. Margaret came to the side of the bed. She looked at my son. She looked at him for a long time, and then she said it. I always knew you'd find a way to make this look real. Room went completely still. Daniel turned from the window. I felt his entire body change from 10 feet away. I looked at my son. I looked at his face, the new face, the face that had not yet learned that the world could be anything other than warm. I felt the fury arrive, and I felt it pass through me and out the other side because I was holding my child, and the fury did not get to be the thing I felt in this moment. I looked at Margaret. I know, I said, very quietly. I've been waiting for you to say that out loud. She blinked. She had not expected that. We're going to need you to leave now, I said. Daniel will call you when we're ready. Daniel crossed the room. He held the door. His mother looked at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop trying to recover the moment. She picked up her bag. She walked out. Daniel closed the door. He came back to the bed. He sat on the edge of it and looked at his son, and then he looked at me and said the thing I had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, to hear. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stopped this a long time ago." I held my son and I let my husband sit beside me, and I did not say it's okay because it wasn't, and he knew it, and we were both too tired and too honest for that particular kindness. But I said, "We're okay, the three of us." And we were. Here is what I want to tell you about the 6 months that followed, because this is the part that matters. Daniel called his mother the next day. I was not in the room. I did not ask for a report. What I knew was that when he came back, he had the face of a man who had finally said the thing he had been building toward for 14 months, and that whatever Margaret had said in response had not moved him the way it might once have. He told me one thing she had said, that she had only been trying to protect him, that everything she had done came from love. Daniel had told her that protection that required destroying his wife was not something he was going to accept as love, regardless of what it called itself. I have thought about that sentence many times since. Margaret did not meet her grandson for 6 weeks. That was Daniel's boundary, and he held it without asking me whether he should soften it, which was how I knew he understood the full size of what she had done. At 6 weeks, she came to our house. She sat in the chair in the living room, and my son was in my arms, and she looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at me. She said, "I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give yet." I said, "I know." I said, "You can meet him." I handed her my son. I watched her hold him. I watched something happen on her face that was too complicated for me to name and too human for me to dismiss. She was not transformed. I want to be honest about that, because the stories that end with complete transformations are usually leaving something out. Margaret is who she is, a woman built from 40 years of protecting something she loved, and that does not disappear in a hospital room or a living room or a single honest conversation. But she had said she owed me an apology. And she had held my son and known, in the specific, undeniable way of a grandmother meeting the realest thing in the room, that there was nothing left to question. 3 months later, she called me directly. Not Daniel, me. She asked if she could take me to lunch, just the two of us, which had never happened in 3 years. I said yes because I was curious, and because I had learned that the people who surprise you in the worst moments are also capable of surprising you in others. We sat at a restaurant and she ordered carefully, and for a few minutes we talked around the edges of everything, and then she set her fork down, which is a gesture I had learned to read as significant from her son, and she looked at me. She told me she had grown up with nothing, that she had watched her own mother be taken advantage of by people who saw her family's gradual success as something to extract rather than build, that she had spent her adult life making sure that never happened to the family she made, that somewhere along the way the vigilance had become something she could no longer fully control, a pattern that fired at people who didn't deserve it and called it self-protection because that was easier than calling it fear. She told me she had been wrong about me from the beginning. She did not say she was sorry in those words. She is not built for those sentences either, and I recognized it because I had learned to recognize it in her son. But she told me the truth about herself, and she told it clearly and without asking me to make it easier for her. That is worth something. I decided it was worth something. I told her I appreciated it. I told her that I did not need the past to have gone differently to move forward from here. I told her that my son was going to know his grandmother, and that was my choice, and I was making it. She nodded once. The same way Daniel nods when a thing is settled. We finished lunch. She paid. We walked out together into the afternoon, and she stopped on the sidewalk and looked at me and said the last thing. "You are nothing like I thought you were," she said. "I know," I said. "I've been waiting 14 months for you to find that out." She laughed. A real one. I had never heard a real one from her before. We went back to our lives, the ones that were now, cautiously and with appropriate maintenance, in the same orbit. Here is how the rest of it settled, because I know you want to know. Daniel and his mother rebuilt something. Not what they had, something different, the kind of relationship that exists after a serious rupture and is honest about the scar tissue. She comes to Sunday dinners now. She holds my son with an ease that took months to develop and is now completely genuine. She asks my opinion on things occasionally, small things, and I give it. And she listens in the way of someone who has decided to try a new approach and is still learning its shape. The folder on my phone still exists. I have not deleted it. Not because I expect to need it, but because I spent 14 months building it, and it represents something I don't want to be casual about. The fact that I documented my own life and was ready to defend it. And that readiness mattered even though in the end, the defense that worked was a baby's face and a husband who finally said the true thing out loud. My son is 6 months old now. He is exactly who he was in that hospital room, real and here and entirely uncomplicated in the specific way of people who have not yet learned that the world requires anything other than presence. He does not know any of this story. One day he will, and I will tell it to him the way I tell it now, without bitterness, because bitterness is a thing I decided early that I was not going to let this cost me. What it cost me was a year of being doubted in my most human experience. What it gave me was the knowledge that I can be doubted in my most human experience and come through the other side of it intact. That is not nothing. That is almost everything. If I leave you with one thing, let it be this. There will be people in your life who look at the realest thing you have and find a reason to question it. Not because the thing is questionable, because they are afraid of what it means if it's real. Because real love arriving in a world they have spent years defending against loss is the most threatening thing they can imagine. Those people are not your enemies. They are people who learned to protect themselves in ways that became weapons and forgot to unlearn them. You are not required to absorb the damage. You are not required to explain yourself endlessly or prove your realness to anyone who has decided in advance not to believe you. You are required to hold your son and ask the person causing harm to leave the room and wait for the truth to do what you are too exhausted to do yourself. The truth is patient. It was in that hospital room. It was in that restaurant. It was in the real laugh I had never heard from a woman who had spent 3 years deciding I wasn't worth knowing. Give it time. Keep your records. Hold your real things close. The 6 months are coming. That is my story. A woman who called my pregnancy a performance. A folder I built in the dark. And a laugh on a sidewalk that told me we were going to be okay. If this reminded you that being doubted by the wrong person says nothing about who you are and everything about who they're afraid of, take that with you today. Share this with someone who is in the middle of being questioned by someone who should know better. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.